Hey everyone, Surfbone here, and today I thought I'd get back to the community and open up my scan servers. My Western scan server alone has over 22,000 pieces of evidence from stuff like Marvel and DC, to tabletop stuff like Warhammer that have been gathered by the likes of my writer Hashi, the YouTubers Noodles and Webcam Parrot, and even well-known guys in the community like Nairobi. And now that I have you all jumping for a bit for the link, I'd like to tell you that this was all a lie. I'm not opening up my scan server, and instead, I'll be talking about why you shouldn't just be going out looking for these big, huge scan servers that have everything you could ever ask for. So, if you think this video is just clickbait and you're all mad, yeah, I understand. However, before you just type up this Bible in the comment section with a passion compared to the fires not seen since the dawn of creation, I advise you to watch the rest of the video, and maybe you might learn something. So to start out, I'd like to re-establish a term that I've used in many other previous videos, and that is a secondary. This refers to someone who doesn't directly engage with the source material. So a secondary of comics doesn't actually read them, but instead listens to others talk about them who have hopefully read them. Now that we're all on the same page, if you are someone that just goes off of what scan servers, threads, etc. say about comics without actually reading them yourself, you are in fact being a secondary. Now, being a secondary isn't inherently a bad thing, but you'll obviously be missing out on context on all sorts of things. Now, I know what some people are going to say. Well, the scan servers that I'm in provides all of the context. That's the thing when we do linear analysis, there is always more context. For instance, someone might show you this whole fight of Thor fighting Iron Man, but did they mention that this was Odin Force Thor, an extremist Iron Man? Or then in this fight, Thor says he's not holding back, and then we have to go into this whole history of Thor holding back and so on? This is just the basic versions of these characters that we have to go over loads more context for. Not to mention that you can't exactly search the text bubbles of a comic when it's posted in a scan server or respect thread, nor do you know the greater reasoning as to why a confrontation is even occurring amongst other things. All of this context, this information, is lost when things are just simply posted. And yet for whatever reason, people think they can now form these big, holistic, consistent interpretations based on these scraps that are just meant to be used as models to help explain the rest of the verse, characters, etc. This would be like if you try to reassemble a car based solely off of what you see when you blow up cars in Grand Theft Auto and expect it to drive like a Ferrari. All of what I said is a base case scenario as well. We are assuming that the people who gather these scans know what to look for and such. What if people who look for scans don't believe in dimensional tiering? Or what if they think that simply mentioning the number like Aleph Null makes you magically stronger? Are you really going to trust their judgment about what happens in a fight, or why some character is dumping exposition? Not only do you not get the full picture of what's going on, you effectively get what those people think is going on. To get back to the car analogy, you don't even need to see the car in GTA, but have someone else tell you about it, and they don't know what a spark plug is because they think it's a government conspiracy. Alright, now that scan servers, respect threads, and so on are now in the bin, some of you are probably asking, well, how do I research? Well, how I research and how you should be going forward is pretty simple. Read the source material. Yes, it's that simple. Just read the source material for yourself. For stuff like anime and manga, this is simple, because all you need to do is just start up at chapter 1 or episode 1 and watch forward. Obviously for stuff like Naruto, the source material would be the manga, with the adaptation being the anime, so you should probably read the manga. You can however just watch the anime and specify that you're doing the anime scaling. Maybe even includes those movies that no one watches. For stuff like Dragon Ball, it's a bit more confusing with Kai and Super in the manga. This minor confusion isn't much compared to trying to read some of the larger Western verses like comics. Now, stuff like comics, my best advice is to read a single character or a version of said character. So maybe like New 52 Aquaman, or the grade shirt Hyperion that appears in Hickman's Avengers run. With some of the bigger characters like Superman or Spider-Man, you can only really get to the point of, I've read a ton, and I don't think there's anything that contradicts X, Y, and Z. Obviously, this may sound bad, but when you actually read so much of these characters, it becomes next to impossible for some interpretations to actually be wrong. For example, Universal post-crisis Superman, in order to be properly addressed or debunked, would need to be going over so many scans and explaining each and every line of evidence, of which there are at least 100 lines of evidence, making the debunk scan requirement to be over 100 things that explain away every single Universal feat. So some positions are pretty safe to have when you understand the source material enough, and how do you do that is just by reading it properly. Another issue is that you can never truly read everything, as characters in random comics will sometimes make statements about past events that no reading list or chronology will ever mention. Now, if you're researching for a very specific thing, like let's say, if you want to see if Iron Man has resistance to mind hacks, you start looking in comics with known mind hacks users like Professor X, for instance. But when your verse is so small in comparison, like Bleach, you shouldn't just assume it has every single hacks. Let me repeat that again for those in the back. Bleach does not have every hacks in fiction or anything else like that. So please, for the love of God, please stop thinking that Bleach has every new hotness hacks. That way of looking for stuff, where instead of looking for where it might occur, you look for any possible way for the text to fit your conclusion, it's just confirmation bias, which is bad for you, obviously. So within the community, there are quite a few things people try to use that are not within the source material to scale characters. This ranges from stuff like using platonic forms all the way to arguing your verse scales to Lovecraft because of a passing mention of a book. When you make these claims, it's important to remember that you're saying it is the most consistent interpretation for X to be Y. This also implies for crossover scaling, which I've covered in another video. Just because Sonic crossed over with Image at one point doesn't mean some random statement from an unknown Image comic character magically applies to Sonic's cosmology. It should also be noted that we all still call this stuff crossovers, which kind of implies they aren't one big cosmology in the first place. But hey, the good scalers amongst us clearly put way more thought into it than the window lickers who try to peddle to it. Guidebooks can honestly be their own section, since they are so broad, especially when it comes to what the community refers to as a guide. To get boomer on you guys, back in my day, Dragon Ball had like 3 actual guidebooks: the Daizenshu, the Super Exciting Guide, and the El Manga Legendario. Nowadays, I hear Dragon Ball debaters calling stuff like yogurt box guides as if we should honestly ever value what yogurt boxes say. And a not even lower level of why we should care about it would be author statements. You probably already know what video I'm going to be referring to, but if you want to use author statements, you might as well just go ask somebody else who you know, like say Naya for instance, as what he says will probably be just more informed anyways. If at the end of this section you're thinking to yourself, man Surfbone, I thought you would agree with my scale. Well, firstly, I hate it when people use the word scale to refer to lines of evidence supporting an interpretation. Secondly, no, I wouldn't agree to a scale that relies on yogurt wrappers and third-party RPG books for a non-tabletop game. That level of mental gymnastics is too much for me, and I really don't understand how people can have all these uber weird positions then think, man, Surfbone's smart, he probably agrees. If that is you, take a step back and imagine trying to justify to someone outside the community. Imagine trying to explain why yogurt wrappers should be used, or why a passing mention of the number Aleph 1 means anything. The writer for this and most of my other videos, Hashi, has made this diagram of where scaling comes from. Now, as we see in the diagram, all scaling does just come from the source material. But then, we have different types of readers. The progressive readers read all they can, and try to explain all they can, ending up with interpretations that are overarching and groundbreaking. It should say something that the interpretations everyone talks about, stuff like the story of Superman or Kakuzu Beats Pain, come from this certain group of people on Discord who try to read as much as possible. While on the opposite end of the spectrum, regressive readers read as little as possible, coming to conclusions as fast as possible, excluding comics because brain hurting. They end up contributing to the stagnant muck of most forums. The interpretations that come from here usually just get laughed at or are bastardizations of stuff the progressives have already done while being plagued by sunk cost of, if we yield on this position, then... The people who consume both without reading the source material are the secondaries. As a reminder, the door isn't closed or locked. You can just go read comics and not be a secondary. No one is saying you can't. It is just until you read the comics for yourself, you are being a secondary for better or for worse. I say for worse, as anyone who is a progressive scaler knows if everyone read everything, the rest of the community would just be worse as they would have more stuff to be dishonest about. Well, anyway, that's it for the video. I hope you all enjoyed it. Just know I'm going to be coming back with more content for this week and for next week, and I even got a stream on Thursday with Kosu going over some Fire Force scaling. But until then, thank you all for watching, and class is dismissed.